Now, in preparation for our third plenary panel that'll focus on military and intelligence activities in cyberspace, I'd like to welcome Brigadier General Timothy Haugh, the commander of the Cyber National Mission Force at the U.S. Cyber Command. As commander of the Cyber National Mission Force, Brigadier General Haugh serves as the Defend the Nation lead for the commander of U.S. Cyber Command. He coordinates the prevention and response to cyber incidents and campaigns perpetrated by threat actors in order to preserve U.S.'s critical infrastructure and key resources. He most recently served as the U.S. Cyber Command Director of Intelligence. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Commander of Joint Task Force Ares, executing U.S. Cyber Command's counter-ISIS campaign. He also served as the commander of the 480th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Wing, responsible for approximately 6,000 military, civilian, and contractor personnel, and a total enterprise valued at more than $5 billion. Please welcome General Haugh to the stage.
Thank you, Catherine. It's an honor to follow Director Krebs, who's been such a great leader in this space and has also been a great teammate to U.S. Cyber Command in his role as Director of CISA. Everyone, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and represent United States Cyber Command and more specifically the Cyber National Mission Force today as we talk through what is the role of the military in cyberspace. So what I hope to do today is lay out a bit of a challenge in terms of changing perceptions as to what we view that role is of the military in cyberspace. And I'll take some questions at the end, but I ask you to hold all the really hard questions for the group that follows me, including Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Wilson, who drives all of our policy very expertly. So one of the three things that I'd like to cover is in relation to what has occurred over the last year. So it's been a very significant year for United States Cyber Command as we approach our one-year anniversary of elevation to become a full combatant command. In that year, there's been an increase in clarity in a number of key areas. One of those is the nation's strategy, as how we're approaching cyberspace, and then specifically DoD's role, which I'll talk about in terms of where we fit in the DoD cyber strategy, but also an alignment in the law and changes that have occurred over the last year based off of Congress that really align the strategy that we're executing within the executive branch, within the legal framework that has been established by Congress. And then finally, I'll give you our operational approach, how General Nakasone, as the commander of United States Cyber Command, has articulated his overarching operational approach as persistent engagement. I'll talk to you about how we are putting our individual campaigns together in terms of the operational organization of each of those to be able to meet his intent and vision aligned to the DoD cyber strategy. So to outline the significant changes in strategy over the last year. In 2017, the administration published both the National Security Strategy and the National Cyber Strategy. In 2018, the Department of Defense took major steps in terms of the publishing of the National Defense Strategy, which outlined the focus on great power competition, specifically discussing both China and Russia, as well as the intent to be able to increase the lethality of our force and build and grow partnerships and be able to reform our acquisition system to ensure that we're able to meet the demands of the current great power competition. To define the role of cyber, the Secretary of Defense then published the Cyber Strategy, which for us in U.S. Cyber Command as the operational force and the lead element has a major impact on how we've structured our force and organized our force to be able to meet the expectations. It identified 5 key objectives. Ensure that the joint force can achieve its missions in contested cyberspace environment. That means fight our nation's wars and be able to deliver cyberspace capabilities as part of any multi-domain effort that's underway. Strengthen the joint force by conducting cyberspace operations that enhance U.S. military advantages. This is both defensive and offense. How can we ensure that our data can reach the right place for information advantage? Be able to defend U.S. critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity that alone or as part of a campaign could cause a significant cyber incident. This is really where our partnership with Homeland Security has been focused. How do we, as a Department of Defense, bring our weight and capacity to be able to ensure that we are in full support of the Secretary of Homeland Security if our nations and any part of our critical infrastructure is under attack? And I'll talk more about that today. How do we secure our own systems to ensure that we're able to successfully operate in any contested environment? And how do we expand DoD cyber cooperation with interagency, industry, and international partners? As you heard from Director Krebs, the ability to partner across all of the elements within cyberspace is a critical enabler for all of us. Whether that be an international partner that faces the same threats to democracy, whether that's an industry partner that is a critical enabler for any critical infrastructure segment defense, or it's another U.S. government element that has a like mission that needs to be able to have the right information or the right capability to be successful. We've seen a significant progress based off of the shift in that strategy, which has allowed us to begin to align the force. General Noxoni speaks very proudly of the fact that now we are a fully operational, capable force that has an ability to be able to conduct a full spectrum operations in defense and offense, and we have been successful in doing that with our interagency, international, and industry partners. While those changes had occurred in the strategy for the department, there were also some significant things that occurred within changes to the law that really sent a very clear signal from Congress as its expectations for the Department of Defense. And I'll just highlight a couple of those. There were a number of them in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2019, but I'll just highlight three. The first was an update to the law that affirmed the authority of the Secretary of Defense to conduct military activities and operations in cyberspace. Clearly articulated an expectation for the Department of Defense to use its capability to compete with adversaries that were operating outside of international norms. That allowed us as a department to begin to organize and resource in partnership with the other combatant commands. The second was a clear articulation of the desire from Congress for the department to be part of the interagency activities that conduct active defense against Russian malign activities, the People's Republic of China, DPRK, and Iran, where they are conducting attacks in cyberspace outside of international norms. Congress gave clear authority to the President to give that authorization to the department to be able to conduct those activities. And finally, in terms of the focus on the critical infrastructure, Congress authorized the Department of Defense a pilot program to be able to enhance cybersecurity and resiliency as part of critical infrastructure, specifically giving the Secretary of Defense the authority to deploy 50 military personnel to work with the Department of Homeland Security under the department's expense to be able to better defend critical infrastructure in terms of the capacity and technical capability that the department can bring for areas that DHS requests our assistance. This took away a critical challenge for us that in the past, if DHS needed our assistance, we had to go through a pretty complex process to be able to provide that assistance that also required DHS to fund DoD's activities. That's no longer the case. We have the ability up to 50 personnel to be able to now really rapidly respond if DHS has a call. We can bring more mass through the previous process, but now we can move much more quickly in partnership with CICCE as needed. So taking those two things, the strategy and the changes in the law, General Noxoni articulated an operational approach called persistent engagement. And that was really to establish how we would, as a Department of Defense, be able to compete with those adversaries that were conducting activities that were in threat to our national interest, and also into the national interests of our allies. So those activities below the level of armed conflict. And what he charged all of his components to do was to begin to be very focused on who are our partners. And it really is defined in two key areas. How do we enable our partners' activities? And then how do we prepare to act, if called upon by our nation, to stop any adversary activity? He describes that 2/3 enable, 1/3 act. And those are areas that we have now seen as an approach that allows us to be really good partners, particularly with our domestic agencies, whether that be the FBI or DHS, to be able to enable their actions to be able to stop adversaries and their actions that would impact U.S. interest. As Director Krebs identified, one of those areas that General Oxoni has talked about is our partnership as U.S. Cyber Command with DHS and FBI as part of the midterm elections. I think everyone in U.S. Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, are very proud of the support that we provided to the Department of Homeland Security and view that as a critical example as to how we approach persistent engagement. In this case, wherever we could bring any additional information that would allow DHS to meet its assigned mission or FBI its ability to meet its task and malign influence as part of the broader interagency team. So what I really would like to emphasize is the idea that what we are focused on in terms of military activities in cyberspace is not necessarily the department's outcome. It's not about what the Department of Defense's role is. It's how can we enable our international partners, our domestic partners in industry to be able to defend those things that are critical to our nation's success. As we've done that, I'll give you some examples of outcomes that in the past may not have been considered things that we would have looked at as a department as measures of our effectiveness. But today we can look at it and say, if the Department of State issues a demarche based off of information that the Department of Defense has provided, that is an outcome that's positive for our nation. If DHS can issue an alert that goes to industry based off of information that is derived from our operations, that's a success for the Department of Defense. Whether it's Treasury sanctions, whether it is the Department of Energy being able to communicate directly through the Energy ISAC back to all of its member firms, threats to that sector, that is an outcome from the Department of Defense that we are seeking to achieve, and being able to use our resources to do that. As we look at how we've approached the overall for persistent engagement, I just want to give you a sense as to how we're organizing our operational activities, particularly within the Cyber National Mission Force. So our mission is focused on malicious cyber actors that are outlined in the National Defense Strategy and the DoD Cyber Strategy. And the way that we have organized our operational activities is across three lines of effort. The first line of effort is focused on gaining insights into adversary activities. Being able, through the course of our operations and our partnerships, to be able to gain a better understanding of what our adversaries are targeting, in particularly any targeting of critical infrastructure in the United States. Foundation to us for this line of effort is our partnership with the National Security Agency, who's our closest and enduring partner in terms of understanding what's occurring in the battle space that we operate in. Based off those foundational insights, our focus is on being able to enable our partners and to enable defense. So we spend a significant portion of each of our task force's time identifying who are the most critical partners based off of either the critical infrastructure segments or in relation to adversary activity and what is being targeted within the United States or within our allies. As an example of this, as Director Krebs alluded to, we have moved towards the Defend Forward model, actually moving off of our Department of Defense networks and partnering with various nations to be able to hunt for adversary activity on their networks. We've announced those publicly as to what we've done in the past, and we continue to do those. The intent for that is to challenge our adversaries wherever they are, and to be able to gain insights from how they are targeting the critical processes of our allies and our partners, to be able to bring that information back and be able to disclose that to DHS and FBI in terms of critical infrastructure and law enforcement, as well as directly to industry. We have begun an initiative that if we discover malware as part of our ongoing Cyber Command operations, we have begun disclosing that malware on global cybersecurity forums so that we could pass that information directly to industry to allow industry to be able to generate countermeasures more quickly. That's an area we want to continue to explore as to what is the right role for the department in terms of our relationships with industry, how we pass information in the most agile and quickest manner to be able to put additional pressure on adversaries that are targeting our critical infrastructure. We see those international partnerships continuing to grow. We see them particularly in areas where nations are looking for assistance And we are partnering both with our geographic combatant command teammates, DHS, as well as very closely with the Department of State to be able to enable that. Additionally, our final area that in terms of our line of effort is to be prepared to act, to be able to impose a cost. That cost could come in terms of any of those other areas that I described. It could be through enabling state, it could be enabling treasury, and we now have use cases and examples of where we've been very successful at doing that with each of our partners. At other times, it's going to be how we pass information to our international partners to allow them to have an outcome. We look forward in each of these situations to be able to build these partnerships, both within the U.S. government, with our international partners, and with industry, so that as U.S. Cyber Command and the role that DoD has articulated, and how we will be a partner in terms of defending critical infrastructure, being prepared to impose costs, and then as if our nation calls upon us in times of conflict, to be able to provide multi-domain outcomes as part of an overall strategy for our nation. So what I would like to leave you with today before taking questions is as you think about United States Cyber Command and the role that we will play going forward, think of us as a teammate, think of us as a close partner, and someone that is most interested in defending the critical infrastructure of our United States, being able to do that as a good partner, and to be able to ensure that at every step along the way we are in very close compliance with international norms, our laws, and our values in every operation that we conduct. I stand by for any questions and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Hi, my name is Rosemary Tropiano. I'm a research assistant at the National Security Archive for their Cyber Vault project, and I was wondering if you could speak to how persistent engagement is a part of the cyber deterrence strategy. Thank you.
So what we view, persistent engagement is really complementary from a cyber deterrence perspective. It is about competing in space that we have not competed previously from a Department of Defense standpoint. In terms of that precondition of how that both Congress, the overall national security strategy, and the national defense strategy has now set an expectation that the Department of Defense will engage through constant contact with our adversaries is a step for us to now be able to contest those adversaries in ways that we haven't in the past. We have not previously imposed costs in that space, and we will be prepared to move across the conflict continuum as the nation calls upon the Department of Defense. But we see those as very complementary in the long run.
Hi, Mark Pomerleau with Fifth Domain. You mentioned some of the authorities that Congress gave you in the last NDAA. There's also been some authorities that have been provided by the executive. With the NDAA season rapidly coming upon us, are there any authorities or tweaks from an operational perspective that you're looking for from Congress that you've engaged with them to try to maybe amend or provide in addition to what they did last year?
So that's from a change in law as a tactical commander. That's an area that really exceeds what I'm normally involved in. I can say what I think we have done is really between the Department of Defense had a very good engagement with Congress in terms of ensuring that they're getting routine updates as to what the department's activities have been, and allows them to also then ensure that their oversight responsibilities have been met and that we are meeting the intent of those changes in law. I will expect that the department will continue to have refinements, but that's not an area that I routinely am involved in. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, my name is Neil Hussein, data manager with CWA. I was curious, seeing that we're speaking at an educational institution, when you're looking at recruits, are there particular backgrounds that you're looking for coming in, skills that you're in particular need of that people should keep in mind? Are there particular certifications that you make sure that people who are joining your team are acquiring once they're on it? Thank you very much.
Oh, it's a great question. So in terms of the type of individuals that we're looking for, particularly within the department, it starts all the way from an 18-year-old out of high school to a PhD that will fill one of our more senior roles as a senior civilian. So we have need for that across that entire spectrum of talent. From someone that's coming in out of high school, what we're really looking for is passion and desire about cyber in general, and that really is a nice starting area where we've now, within our recruitment process, have begun to assess that type of interest early, and people that have talent to be able to work them through a series of certifications. Our foundational certifications mirror those within industry, whether that's Security Plus and Net Plus, A Plus in terms of standard cybersecurity certifications. But then once they join our force, depending on the work role that they're in, we'll give them very tailored training. So that's an enlisted recruit, as they join our force, will then go through a series of training to ensure that they meet every standard in terms of being able to comply with whether that be our legal regimes or the expectations to be able to conduct an operation. In terms of our officers, that is a mix of skills and talents, whether that's individuals coming from the service cyber academies that have really grown over the last 5 years in terms of computer science expertise. So bringing them in primarily to be leaders, operators, and planners versus, or also tool developers as part of our team. And then civilians, we have been given the authority to do cyber accepted service, which allows us to bring talent from industry in a much more direct way. And that's an area for us that allows us, when we get after the types of things in terms of reform, cyber acquisition, and those areas, bringing in talent directly from industry. We've now been enabled to do that, to be able to leverage industry expertise, as well as taking individuals that are coming out of master's programs that we can also work to fund their continuing education or their student loans to be able to put them in a more senior position as either a senior planner, acquisition expert, or intelligence professional focused on cyberspace. Great question.
Yes, sir. Dan Freed with the Atlantic Council, used to be a State Department veteran. The Washington Post reported that U.S. Cyber Command paid a virtual visit on the Internet Research Agency, the St. Petersburg troll farm, letting them know that you were keeping your eye on them. Personally, I thought that was a really cool thing to do. Can you confirm this? And beyond this one reported incident, does this fit inside your spectrum of possible actions? That is, letting a potential or an actual cyber adversary know that we have eyes on?
So in terms of any confirmation of any specific operation, that's outside the policy of the department. I think more broadly, what the nation expects of the Department of Defense is to be prepared to take actions when called upon. And I think those are areas that General Nakasone has talked about. We have seen that all the way from Ambassador Bolton to the Secretary of Defense to General Nakasone have described what the expectation is, that if we're called upon to defend the critical infrastructure of the United States, we'll be ready to do that. And that's an area that we spend a significant amount of time to be both exercising, to be working with our partners, and also to work really closely with our interagency colleagues to make sure if there is an action that we ever anticipate taking, that we do that really transparently, both with our international teammates as well as with our interagency colleagues.
Well-crafted answer, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to the next panel. I'll turn it back over to Catherine. Again, really honored to be here today to represent U.S. Cyber Command, and hope all of you are really well postured to celebrate our 1-year birthday as being Combatant Command on May 4th. Thank you all very much.